Let me finish up the R for you. Someone was joking about gender. Now we got gender. So that's pretty good. So the R is recognize that real differences exist. And here's what I would say. We need to be careful about what we state is a hard difference between male and female. So let me say this. God wired up males and females differently. But sometimes we as conservative evangelical Christians, sometimes we try to say some differences are hardwired by God when they're not. Let me try to explain what I mean. Work with me for just a second. I have a Harley Davidson. Woo-hoo. Let me just tell you. I mean, God bless America. And it wasn't loud enough when I bought it. Some of you guys who are motorcycle guys, I put Reinhardt exhaust on it, so it's obnoxiously loud. And a couple of weeks ago, early on a Friday morning, I rode it to school. I wasn't teaching that Friday. I rode it to school. And I stopped at a breakfast place. And when I went out in the parking lot and cranked it up, it's so loud it set off the car alarm next to me. I was so proud. It was like one of the proudest moments of my life. I didn't go in and tell them or anything. I just drove away with, oh, no. And so when you hear about motorcycles, people say, oh, yeah, motorcycles. Yeah, that's a guy's. I enjoy watching drag racing, straight line acceleration. Out of Bristol, Virginia, just a couple weeks ago, the lady who's winning the race on the bikes is a lady. She's drag racing motorcycles, and she won the race at Bristol, Virginia. You see what I'm getting at? We think, motorcycles, guys. Well, there's one of the most famous funny car and top fuel racers ever was Shirley Muldowney. She won the NHRA title 3 times, and we all think, well, that's a guy thing. There's nothing wrong with the girl that likes drag racing. In fact, where I grew up at, that would have been like the prom queen, right? Wow, it's amazing. But you see what I'm saying? One time I was preaching on this very subject that I just finished with you guys. And before I got up to speak, they were giving the announcements. It's always, listen, if you have a guest speaker, never give announcements right before the guy gets up to speak. Anyway, so they were giving announcements all about all this sort of stuff that's going on in the church. And they said, and the men's group is going to the gun range to shoot guns this Saturday. And my wife leaned over and said, why can't I go? Because Miss Lisa likes to shoot skeet. May I remind you of Annie Oakley, right? One of the greatest marksmen ever. So my point is there's stuff like that where we get a little too wound up and hung up on stuff. So there are genuine differences between male and female. Just make sure it's a biblical one and not one we've just invented. You got it? So that's what I have in mind. Between the breaks, someone was chatting with me again about the use of names. So let me stress, it's the context of a relationship. You who know someone very intimately, the way you're going to handle the name issue is going to be very different from me who just meet someone for the first time. I mean, if I meet someone and they tell me, hi, my name is Bill, and then somebody tells me 6 months later, that's not really Bill, that used to be, okay, that's the way we navigate that's going to be very, very different. I am not saying that we affirm transgenderism. What I'm saying is we have to meet people where they're at a lot of times. And I'm asking for Christians. In my book on affirming God's image, I spend a lot of time talking about the whole name issue. I'm asking us to be kind to each other because a lot of Christians getting all mad about this and we're kind of arguing each other. To keep in mind that, again, gender reassignment surgery doesn't change a male into a female and doesn't change a female into a male. We know that. If we can have a calm conversation, if such thing is possible with our LGBTQ neighbors, and if we can have a dialogue, and the name issue comes up, what we have to explain is, from my perspective, and I realize you think I'm wrong. I understand you think I'm wrong, but you are asking me in what I perceive to be a lie. That's the challenge. You're asking me to affirm something that I don't believe to be true. And I understand that from your perspective, it's very, very true. I understand that. Is there some common ground we can find here where I can address you in a way that doesn't cause me to compromise, but you don't feel offended? Is there some way we could do that? That's what I'm saying. And I think if creative people who think, if we're people of goodwill, we can achieve that. So I would try to always, again, stress our lead message, though, is the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. That's what we start with. We always start. I mean, if I had 2 minutes on national TV, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about an empty tomb. That's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about a cross and salvation by grace. So let's talk about the Bible and gender and sexuality when it comes to celebrating the gift of sex. 2003 at the MTV, I got to turn it on first. At the MTV Video Awards, I don't watch a lot of MTV, but Madonna came out and did a performance with Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears. Madonna came out second, Britney and Christina came out first, and they had children dancing across the stage. Madonna's daughter, Lourdes, was 6 at the time, and his children came out like they were flower girls, so they had children in this. They're dancing flowers. And Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears come out dressed as brides, and about halfway through the song, Madonna comes out dressed as a groom, and she gives this big, wet, slippery kiss to Britney Spears on stage. And it caused quite a stir at the time, as well it should. But what I would point out to you is the song they were singing when all that happened is called Hollywood. It's Madonna's song Hollywood, and there's a line in it, and she sang this while they're doing all this. I'm bored with the concept of right and wrong. I'm bored with the concept of right and wrong. I don't have it here. We were talking about this right before we came in. Write this word down, would you? Would you write one word down? I don't have it on the screen. It is the word autonomy, A-U-T-O-N-O-M-Y, A-U-T-O-N-O-M-Y. It means self-law. I am a law unto myself. You say, where does that come from? Genesis 3. Yes, you shall be like gods. That is autonomy. We were chatting about this just before church tonight. And that's what you see right there. I'm bored with the concept of right and wrong. Well, actually, Madonna's not bored with the concept of right and wrong, because if you get off on a lot of left-wing agendas, she gets as rabid as any fundamentalist preacher on the issue. So she's very interested in the concept of right and wrong. What she doesn't like is the Christian concept of right and wrong. That's what she doesn't like. But that's what she's singing while they were doing all that. And this is the sort of concept that we're addressing, is a culture that has gone on to autonomy. I've already talked about some of these things, changing sexual ethics. We talked about gender, but I want to focus on just a couple of terms there. First of all is Freudian psychology. It's easy to throw rocks at Sigmund Freud. Not everything he said was wrong. Just a lot of what he said was wrong. But one of the things that he said, among many others, is he sexualized young children, and he said children are born with sexual impulses that parents repress, and then they pop out again when they're older, when they go through puberty. And so this basically sexualizes children. It's Freudian psychology. And so this has been sort of a driving engine for a lot of things in the last 75, 80 years. But media exposure as well. My word, I have a friend whose parents went to see Gone with the Wind when it came out in 1939. And you remember at the end of the movie, Rhett Butler uses the curse word, right? And he talked about his parents, that the entire auditorium gasped. Everybody just gasped. Well, we've sure moved beyond that, haven't we? This is a guy, who knows who that is? Anybody know who that is? Bruno Mars. It's a handsome, I know we're not supposed to covet, but look at the hair. I mean, I'm just saying, right? Man, I'm telling you, that's something. It's like an engineering marvel right there. It's like the Golden Gate Bridge and Bruno Mars' hair. Come see America, right? But anyways, a handsome guy. And, he sang at the Super Bowl halftime a few years back. And one of the songs he sang was called Locked Out of Heaven. And I pulled a few lines out of the song. He says at one place, I'm born again every time you spend the night. Another place he says, because your sex takes me to paradise. Yeah, your sex takes me to paradise. You see what he's done? He's taken Christian terms and sexualized them. You see that? And the media exposure. Millions and millions of downloads of this song. Millions of downloads. And this is tame compared to what's out there. I can't put T-Pain and Flo Rida lyrics up here. I can't, it would be wrong in a church to put their lyrics up here. But you need to understand what your children listen to over and over again. When my daughters had young men come by, this string of young men come to the house, meeting my daughters when they're younger, I always ask them, if I hit shuffle on your iPod, what's going to come up? And I would try to read the Billboard Hot 100 and know a few song titles so I could act informed, right? But basically what I learned was artists instead of songs, and I just knew if certain artists came up, it was not good. There's a young, I grew up in Dallas, Georgia, if you're wondering, that's where I grew up at, Dallas, Georgia, west of Atlanta. There's a young man that grew up about 20 miles south of me in a town called Lithia Springs, Georgia. He goes by the stage name Little Nasty X. And I like to joke, so I'm not joking now, okay? I'm as gravely serious as someone who considers himself first and foremost a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ can be. He had a song recently, and in the video, he was having gay sex with Satan in the video. I repeat, the video, he's having gay sex with Satan. And this is a young man grew up 20 miles south of where I grew up at. I can't tell you how popular he is. He actually did a version of one of his songs with Billy Ray Cyrus. Some sort of they did sort of country hip-hop mix. And kids download that and download that and download that and download that and all these sort of lyrics and the vulgar media. And there is an old acrostic, I bet you know it. G-I-G-O. Garbage in. And it is impossible to download those lyrics over and over and over again. The word conscience in the Bible basically means to know with. To know with, it means the conscience has to have a reference point. If the reference point is the Bible, the conscience works really well. If the reference point is a virtuous person who's influenced your life, the conscience can work very well. If the reference point is the top 10 off of the Billboard Hot 100, your conscience is going to be fried, and it will not work. And so this is vulgar media, but the challenge is you have 10 and 11-year-olds being introduced to this stuff. Are you aware that the age of puberty is going down and down and down and down and down and down and down? There's a lot of questions about that. I hear there's some of the suggestions are just bizarre conspiracy theories. Some of it is just we have healthier diet. There's a body of evidence that suggests some of it is children are being exposed to sexual messages at earlier and earlier ages that are firing off things in the brain that start puberty. That's at least a contributing variable in the problem. But what I can tell you is we're sexualizing children. And that's a bad thing. Little boys and girls need to be kept safe. And they need a tender environment and a church and parents that protect them from unholy messages. God bless the parents. God bless the parents that say, no, we are not going to watch that movie. No, you're not going to that. Well, your other friends say, well, everybody's going to see it. They'll get to see it somehow. Maybe they will, but if they watch that trash, it's not going to be because I didn't put up every obstacle I humanly could to it. So vulgar media has changed the way we look at things. I could go on with that all night long. Let's talk about a few things. The natural impulse view. I'm going to give you 4 wrong views of sexuality, then we're going to get the right one. Got it? 4 wrong views of sexual ethics, then the right one. Tracking? I have too many bullet points. I will not be able to talk about all of them. And you're going to be frustrated. And you will join thousands of people in my lifetime who've been frustrated. So y'all can start a support group, right? But, hi, I heard Branch talk. I got frustrated. Yay! Okay, so, anyway. So let's talk about the first one. The natural impulse view, that is also known as the Playboy morality. This is a view we reject. So this says, I'm using the Daniel Heimbach here, Playboy sexual morality begins with physical pleasure associated with the sexual experience and proceeds to construct an entire framework of moral thinking based on it. That's the natural impulse view. It's called the Playboy morality after Hugh Hefner and his wretched crowd. Basically, this view says this: greater human happiness is attained if people can take whatever pleasure they can get from sex without the burden of guilt. And there's only one rule And that is consent, as long as everybody agrees. But what I will tell you is, we live in a culture that for 75 years has been advocating the playboy morality. Just as long as everybody consents, it's all. Do you remember that song from the 60s? If you can't be with the one you want, love. Well, yeah, this is that. Natural impulse for you, whatever you want to do, just as long as everybody consents. But if you raise a generation of men to be taught that, well, yeah, sex is not for marriage, women are for sex, that's what they're there for, why are you surprised when you have the hashtag #MeToo movement and suddenly women coming out of the woodwork having been sexually assaulted at work? And the wretched multi-millionaires abusing. I'll tell you why. You can't raise a generation of men and tell them, oh but as long as everybody agrees, at some point that just goes out the window. That's a hard rule to maintain if you accept that worldview. Because other people, if sex is really just about pleasure, for some people, my pleasure comes from doing bad things to other people, even when they don't want it. It's connected to naturalistic Darwinism. I've got some words here about Alfred Kinsey, whom I do not like. Will Rogers never met Alfred Kinsey, and so he is the father of the sexual revolution, and he was a entomologist that taught at the University of Indiana that started teaching about sex. He's the author of this book called The Sexual Behavior in the Human Male in 1948, which is the opening salvo of the sexual revolution. Have you ever heard this idea 10% of all people are gay? You ever heard people say that? That comes from Kinsey's report in 1948. He didn't even say that. What he said was 10% of all males are exclusively homosexual for 3 years between the ages of something like 28 and 45 or something like that. But he's the origin of that. There's by my book, and explains why that data is wrong. But here's what he said. Among other things in this book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, which, again, he's a professor at the University of Indiana when he published it. It talks about sexual abuse of children. And this is what he said. And again, my point here is, if you raise a culture that believes the natural impulse view, consent goes out the window eventually. Here's what he said, and I'm quoting directly. Now, this is from his second volume, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female. It is difficult to understand why a child, except for its cultural conditioning, should be disturbed at having its genitalia touched, or disturbed at seeing the genitalia of other persons, or disturbed at even more specific sexual contexts. What that is a seared conscience. That's Alfred Kinsey. The Kinsey Institute's still there at Indiana. Second view is the affection view. I will tell you, this is also called the romantic morality. In my opinion, when church kids go wrong in their sexual ethics, usually it's this. So it's also called the romantic morality. Basically, it says this: sex is okay as long as you are in love, but you have to spell love the right way. L-U-U-U-V-V-V-V-V, love, right? That means one hormone talked to another hormone. They said, let's have a party, right? And we have this campus at our school, and we have these young romances, Bible college romances. They just, right? Sometimes I'm sitting at my house, which is about a half a mile from the campus, and the earth shakes kind of seismically, and a blue haze goes across the sky, and I look at Lisa and I said, someone over at that school just had their first kiss. I'm telling you, that's what happened. They're in love over that campus. One day I was lecturing. It was on the history of Christianity. I was lecturing about Augustine. It was one of the greatest lectures in the history of Christianity. And this young man got up and ran out of my class. I said, okay. I kept lecturing this awesome lecture. He came back about 15 minutes later. He's breathing heavy. And his face is red. And so the class is over. This awesome lecture is done. And he, as this one will be, I promise. And so he came up to me and said, Dr. Branch, you noticed I ran out of class. I said, you mean when you ran out of that awesome, earth-shattering lecture? Yes. I said, well, what was going on? He said, well, I have a question to ask you. I said, okay, what's the question? If a girl's dating one boy, should she still get texts from another boy? And I was trying to connect that to St. Augustine. I wasn't quite able to. And long story short, he's been brooding on this. He's in love with this young lady. And she'd gotten a text from this guy on campus. Not him. And he saw the guy walk by the windows outside our classroom. He jumped up out of my classroom, ran out in the parking lot of Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. We want to fulfill the Great Commission. And he's in the parking lot. Hey, you better not send her any more texts. I'm going to give you a piece of this. Yeah, Old Testament wrath's about to come down to you, buddy. I mean, he's threatening him to a fight in the parking lot of Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He tells me all this. So I'm scratching my head. I say, okay, well, let me ask you something. Are you in love with her? I don't know. I don't know. I said, what do you mean you don't know? You just left one of the greatest lectures ever to go challenge a man to a fight in the parking lot of the seminary because he sent her a text and you don't know if he's in love. Girls, I'm going to tell you why he did that. Because men are stupid. That's why he did that. And I'm teasing. That's the romantic. We're in love. That couple they finally got married. They have kids now. Yeah, but the point being, the romantic morality just raises the affection that you feel in love. That becomes, you base all your morals off these emotions. Sexual freedom is praised. One should expect several partners in a lifetime. You're going to have lots of people you're in LUUVVV with. In my opinion, when evangelical kids go sideways, this is how they do it. There's a lot more I want to say about that. I have some critiques of it. I've got to move on. And this is the part where you get frustrated, and some of you type A parts are going, I didn't write everything down. I didn't write everything down. I didn't write everything down. And I'm just going to laugh tonight when I drink my root beer in my room and think about you frustrated at this. And it's like, that's why I give other people's children money, right? Do you enjoy doing that? I give other people's children money. We're getting close enough in age, I think I could say that. You know why I enjoy doing that? I give a kid a $5 bill and say, you can stop at Quick Trip and get anything you want. And they get in the car, we got to stop at Quick Trip. Oh, we're not stopping. I got my money. I love doing that to families. It's a great joy that I have. Anyway, the self-actualization view, sex is wholeness. I put a name, I call it the therapeutic morality. Put a name beside this. You ready? Planned Parenthood. So basically this view says if you're going to be a mature, whole person, you need to have sex. And if you're not having sex, you're not a mature, whole person. And yes, that includes teenagers. And it's the therapeutic morality. It's an ethic of fulfillment, personal growth, limiting sex to heterosexual monogamous marriage is oppressive. There's a bit of Freudian psychology in this too, that people who have angst about sex, it comes from Christian sexual ethics. In fact, there are people who think the reason there are problems in Rhode Island are the people in this room here tonight. That's what they think. They're convinced. They're advocating all sorts of ideas that are obviously destructive to healthy humans, but you're the problem. That's what they're going to say. Here it is. I've got more to say, but let me just move on. Let's talk about, there's you type A bites, your email for the PowerPoint. You can read it all. Better yet, buy one of my books. I got another one coming out where I talk about some of this. Pagan sexual morality. Sex is spiritual life. You guys ever heard of Wicca? So this is a view that says sex is how you connect with God. It's tied to a worldview idea, monism, all is one, all is God, so I've got a little bit of God in me. And if I'm divine, then the way I connect with the divine is by having sex. I'm divine, you're divine. Did you guys read that crazy book about 15 years ago, The Da Vinci Code? This was in that book, by the way. This sexual ethic was in that book. Wicca is perhaps the most divergent expression of a widely divergent expression of religion. Wicca is the most popular form of neo-paganism. What I would say is not all Wiccans are the same. My chaplain assistant in the United States Army Reserves when I was in was Wiccan. She was a very fine person. She was actually very conservative in her morals, but was acutely aware of what I'm talking to you about tonight. But for her, I don't want to violate, some things she shared about her life, but I think I understand how she landed there, and I'm still praying she'll come to know Christ. But so let me just tell you, if you read the Old Testament, have you ever read about Asherah, Ashtoreth, Astarte, all these names in the Old Testament? Those are pagan goddesses, and they're all related to sex worship. A lot of that Baal, you remember Baal in the Old Testament? A lot of that's related to sex worship. And have you ever read in the Old King James it talked about sacred groves? Sacred groves, what's going on with that? These were trees. I'm not trying to be crude. They were phallic symbols. And people would go out and worship these pagan gods around them, hoping that somehow if you do this around these vulgar symbols, then it's going to increase your prosperity. And the Bible condemns that stuff over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. Goddess worship is mentioned 40 times, I think is the number in the Old Testament. Never once positively. Every time it's worship, it's always condemned. Other thing I would point out is that in the Song of Songs, which is a wholesome, wonderful book about a couple that's in love, and it's a wholesome romance and all the joys of the in-love experience and how God blessed them. But sex is never described as a vehicle to connect with the divine in the book of Song of Songs. Never. It's a gift God gives to the couple. And it's no coincidence that the only book completely about romantic love has the initials SOS, right? The hardest book I've ever preached through in the Bible. You know why? It's 8 chapters of you're awesome. No, you're awesome. No, you're awesome. No, you're. They are so in love. They just spend 8 chapters telling each other how awesome they are. Enough. Somebody have an argument, please. Anyway, biblical sexual morality, abstinence and faithfulness. This is the Christian view. Abstinence before marriage, faithfulness within. C.S. Lewis, in Mere Christianity, one of the more famous quotes he ever gave, he said this, that chastity is the most unpopular of the Christian virtues. There is no getting away from it. The old Christian rule is either marriage with complete faithfulness to your partner or else total abstinence. And that is the Christian rule. And so the challenge is that we teach that. Now, I have run into occasions where parents were afraid to teach their children this. And the reason they were afraid to be as earnestly and soberly pastoral as I can is because they had not followed God's rules in their sexual life, and they were scared to death that their kids were going to ask them, well, Mom and Dad, you're teaching me this. What about you? So let me help you with some talking points, and this is a way you might answer that question. First of all, transparency always builds trust in any relationship, always. So here's what I would suggest. If you're a parent in that situation and your child asks you that question and you've been dreading it and you were not sexually pure in your life, the answer is this. Honey, Mom or Dad, whoever it was, didn't always follow God's rules the way that I should have, but I want you to know that I'm telling you what God says and God's way is always best. That's what I want you to know. And then if they ask for details, then you can say, no, you don't know the details. You don't need to know the details. What you need to know is I've been honest with you. But you don't need to know the details. What you do need to know is I've been forthright with you. So I didn't always follow God's rules, but I want better for you. And what I'm telling you, I know is the truth. So that's how, and just be honest, but if they ask for details, they don't need to know the details. Your goal is, as long as you've been honest, that's the key line. That's a tough conversation, right? So the gift of sexual morality is tied in with the Christian worldview. I will just tell you, so much of what we're dealing with, all these issues, it's just people are coming from a materialistic or a pagan worldview, and they just reject Christian ethics. So it's all tied to the Christian worldview, and everything I'm telling you assumes that God exists and He's declared right and wrong to us about sexual ethics, and He knows best. God knows more about sex than Madonna, I promise. So the gift of gender, we've talked about this already, but gender is not a mere social construction. I will also tell you, it's interesting, if you read Romans 1:24 through 27, where Paul is talking about homosexuality, he uses words for male and female there that come from the Greek translation of Genesis 1. They're not the normal words. He's making a creation argument in Romans 1. And so the gift of gender is something to be celebrated. We bang our heads. You know, part of the thing is the differences between the genders are what attract us, and then they drive us nuts later on. And some of you guys, some of you men, well, you ladies as well, your first year of marriage is actually outlined in Genesis chapter 2 and 3. You didn't know it, but it's right there. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 23, when Adam wakes up. By the way, where was Adam when Eve was made? Where was he at? That explains relationships. Men were asleep when they got started, right? And it's been that way for... And so anyway, he wakes up, there's Eve, and what does he say? Well, bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. Okay, that is a toned-down translation. A rough King Allen Living paraphrase of the Hebrew is, wow, look at that. I've been naming animals. That's not a hippopotamus. Yay! Yahweh, 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 yay, Yahweh. And he just shouting to God. He's so happy. And then about 10 verses later, God says, Adam, we're out there. The woman you gave me. Okay. And that's about your first year of marriage. From bone of my bones to flesh of my flesh to the woman you gave me. Well, you asked for it. Well, anyway. Well, it's the gift of gender. Sexual intimacy is designed for marriage. Genesis 2:24-25. So much in these verses. This is the foundational passage for marriage. If you'll give me about 5 or 6 more minutes, I can get through these. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. Verse 25 ends with shameless intimacy. What I would point out to you is 2 things. Do you see a couple of words there? It says a man shall leave his father and mother. If you don't mind circling words in your Bible, circle the word leave. You see it? And then you see the verb be joined. Do you see that? Be joined. Does everybody see that? Those are 2 verbs. Here's what you need to know. The word covenant is not in that verse, but both of those verbs, leave and be joined to, are words used elsewhere in the Bible where God is talking about his covenant with Israel. And the original audience, when they read that verse, or when Moses read it to them, would have said, well, yeah, we know what you're saying. That's covenant language. What I would point out to you is, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. And so there is a separation from family of origin, leave, that's a covenant term. He joins to his wife, that's a covenant term. A new covenant is established, and then they become one flesh. I repeat, a new covenant is established, and then they become one flesh. When I was in the Army Reserves, they ended don't ask, don't tell. And it was a big thing. So that was all about homosexuality in the military. You want to know the biggest don't ask, don't tell in churches? Hey, that couple that just got engaged in our church, they've grown up here all these years. Are they living together or not? And let me just tell you, one of the reasons LGBTQ people get frustrated at churches is because we've done a really bad job with our sexual ethics. And living together before marriage is not God's plan. We need to be clear about that. And we need to teach our young people, if you're going to go God's way, that's not what you do. They leave, they cleave, they form a new covenant, and then they become one flesh, and then the man and his wife are both naked and were not ashamed. When you live together before you're married, you're trying to start out naked and not ashamed, and you hope maybe a covenant will come out of it. Inverting God's order rarely works out well. Now, I can point to situations where God in his grace has restored and done miracles. Yay, yay, Jesus. That's what we're here to preach about. But at some point, we've got to teach our kids, this is not what we do. So sexual intimacy is designed for marriage. Although a lot of these folks, they don't even want to get married anymore. Their marriage they think is antiquated. But I got to move on. Sexual ethics are the most identifying mark of Christian ethics. 1 Peter 4 says this, for we have spent enough of our past lifetime doing the will of the Gentiles when we walked in lewdness, lust, drunkenness, revelries, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. Some of your translations on that verse will say orgies, and that's a better and more correct translation. And yes, the Roman Empire, they did all that stuff. If you got invited to someone's party at their house and they were wealthy, you could expect sexual favors to be there. And the first and most identifying mark that someone has left a life of sin and is now going God's way pops up in their sexual ethics. That's a consistent theme in the Old Testament and the New Testament. When you leave the world and you go God's way, the first place it pops up at is in someone's sexual ethics, which is why it's such a big deal. Just step aside and making a point. I need to make this point here. That's why it's a big deal in the pulpit too. When pastors do things that are sexually immoral, they don't get to be a pastor anymore. Okay? Why? Because you violated a position of trust. And I'm going to say something else about pastors who commit sexual immorality with a female church member. There's always a power dynamic there. There's always a sense of coercion at work. Now that's the truth. And God can forgive, but restoration to fellowship and restoration to leadership are two different things. Okay, we're going to move on. No sexual intercourse outside of marriage. Hebrews 13:4. Marriage must be respected by all, and the marriage bed kept undefiled, because God will judge immoral people and adulterers. I've got to move on. Adultery is forbidden. Thou shalt not commit adultery. I'm getting there. No sexual intercourse is between people of the same gender. I'm going to talk more about that some tomorrow. I'm going to scoot on past it now. Sexual immorality defiles our bodies. Flee sexual immorality. By the way, the verb flee there is in the present tense. It means continual action. I get up every day. I am on the run. I'm on the run every day. Just like Joseph running out of Potiphar's house. You are always on the run. Every sin that a man does is outside the body, but he commits sexual immorality, sins against his own body. So it defiles the body. Sexual restraint is a mark of true discipleship. Let us behave properly as in the day, not in carousing and drunkenness, not in sexual promiscuity and sensuality, not in strife and in jealousy. And we just need to stress, we have a positive message, God's blessing on romance. This is the opening stanza from the Song of Songs, and the young Shulamith, the young woman, says about her fiancé at this point. They're not married yet. She says, "Oh, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth." And the Hebrew verb tense there really carries the idea of let him kiss me and kiss me again. For your love is more delightful than wine. Blessing is the fragrance of your perfumes. Your name is like perfume poured out. How many of you said about your husband lately, ladies? No wonder the maidens love you. Take me away with you. The Hebrew terminology there is one of a prisoner who gets captured in battle. She said, make me your prisoner. Just take me away. She is in love. And God blesses every bit of it. That's in the Bible. God is not against romance. Well, I gave a pregnant pause there waiting for a response. Let me try again. God is not against romance. Yes. He's for the right kind of romance. And if you go God's way, it's better every time. I mean, it's better every time. I was a chaplain in the Army Reserves. I was deployed 2011, 2012 to the Middle East. Before we went down range, they did all this training about how to find an IED, how to identify IEDs. And even though I'm a chaplain, they'd take me out. One time we were at Fort Riley, and they were taking this practice exercise, and a guy who was running in front of our convoy didn't identify an IED, and it was a fake one, but it made a big noise, no damage done. But when the Humvee I was in rolled over a culvert, this fake IED went off, made a huge boom, scared me to death. Well, what's the problem with an IED? Well, you don't know where they're at. If you knew where the IED was, there's no problem. What we've just gone through is God has gone down through the mess that is this world, and He's put a red flag on a lot of IEDs and say, don't touch this, and don't touch this, and don't touch this, and don't touch this. If you touch this, it's going to hurt you. But if you go this way, man, it's all good. And the blessings are so good when we go God's way. And we get to talk more about that tomorrow afternoon. You're going to have a wonderful speaker in the morning. I want you to hear from me more than anything else that somehow we join conviction and compassion. We stand for the right thing in the right way. And I want all of us to remember, sometimes what LGBTQ people in particular hear us saying is, they think we're saying, well, you guys are broken, but we're not. What we have to get across is, it's not that you're broken and we're not broken. In fact, one of my favorite preachers of all time was an African-American pastor from Los Angeles, California named E.V. Hill. He's dead now. But Dr. Hill once said, Romans 3:23 says, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, but we want to make it say, y'all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And when we talk to folks, we want to make sure they understand we are not saying you have a problem and we don't, that you are broken and we are not. What we are saying is all of us are broken. The ground is level at the foot of the cross, and the same grace I needed is the same grace God gives for you.